We have today a very wonderful treat for you. We have Melanie Baru, who is a professor of sociology here at MJC and a specialist on domestic violence, which is the topic of today's talk. And I've known Melanie since she's been here for a few, 9 years now. I was thinking a decade. And let me tell you, this is a woman who is beloved by her students. Every time I see students listening to her, they adore you, and for good reason, because she's a great professor. And if you want a great sociology class, you need to take her class because you will be so inspired by this woman. No pressure. and I brought, I'm just gonna show you, I brought an actual bio to talk about her, and she said, no, I don't want you to talk about that. So I'm not gonna talk because I'm gonna respect her, but there's a lot I can say about the work that she does on this campus, in our community, in support of students, of people of color. I'm not gonna say any more about that, but she's modest, but she's really great. And please give Melanie a warm welcome.
Thank you. No pressure, no pressure. You're gonna take me and you're gonna be like, she's all right. Thank you all for being here. I know that originally the title was Women's Bodies, but I'm actually presenting on domestic violence and Domestic Violence 101. So hopefully we're all on the same page with that. So yes, well, one is thank you for being here. This is a really important subject matter for me professionally and also in terms of education. I have these slides here that I'm gonna go through. And so pretty much our time together, we're just gonna go, most of you are students already. I think there might be some community folks, but the restrooms are just around the corner if you need to use the restrooms. And then, back entrance or back exits, just in case you need that. I want to introduce you a little bit about me so you just kind of know. I think that education is really important in terms of, to educate, you have to develop relationships, right? You can't really teach if there's not relationships that are established, like who am I? So my name is Melanie Baru, and I'm born and raised in the Central Valley, the area that feeds the nation. Very proud to be part of the Central Valley. That wasn't always the case, but it is now. So I was educated here. I went to San State, got my degree in sociology with a concentration in human services. There was a cultural aspect there. I wanted to move away, but my mom was like, what do you mean you want to go find yourself? You're right there. You do mean find yourself. So in a traditional Mexican household, that was not acceptable. And so I stayed in the area and I worked here. And then I went to graduate school in Humboldt County where I saved my money so I can get my master's degree in sociology, focus on domestic violence, and plan to move away, and I did. But when I graduated Stan State, I was looking for a job, so I needed a job. I'm gonna age myself. So technology was barely beginning, and I know, it was barely beginning, and so I took out the newspaper and I was looking for a job, right, the classifieds. And I came across a position that was called an educator in the area of domestic violence, sexual assault, and rape. For some of the students that have had me before, you all know that I used to have a phobia of public speaking, full-on phobia, not an exaggerated. I'm not exaggerating. I had the whole gagging, sweating, crying, all of that. So it was ironic that I ended up applying for that position and I got it, but it was all divine. And so I became an educator in the area of domestic violence, sexual assault, and rape. I was trained in those areas, taboo subject matters that people just didn't want to talk about, right? The elephant in the living room. And wherever they would have me, I would speak about it. So I was 21 years old, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, really insecure, trained in the area of taboo subject matters such as DV and sexual assault. And I spoke in men's jails, women's jails, honor farm, nurses, doctors, college campuses, you name it. And I did not realize how common domestic violence was. I also didn't realize that I was going to stumble upon a passion, and I did. I realized, wow, so many people have been impacted by domestic violence, and we need to do something about it. But how do we do something about it if we're not even talking about it? How can we also heal when we're not talking about it, right? So I love to make the invisible visible. That's why I teach sociology. So that's a little bit about me. It's passion work. And while I'm not actively in the movement in domestic violence agencies anymore, I took that skill set and that knowledge wherever I went. And so a lot of my work is in the community, working at nonprofits and working in the community centers. And that knowledge, I'd always build workshops, trainings, you name it. Like if you've had me before, I'll squeeze in domestic violence. Somehow, because it is so incredibly important and we need to start talking about it. So that's a little bit about me. Let's see. So the first, well, I shared a little bit about me already. So some agreements. One is, this is a sharing of information. I really don't like the subject, I don't like the framing of an expert coming in and and educating you about a specific subject matter. I'm simply sharing with you what I know, both professionally, academically, my experiential knowledge with working in the field and outside of the field. And this is not for you all to be experts in the field of domestic violence. This is for you to just know some basic elements about it. We all have come across survivors of abuse. At the very least, don't continue to do more damage. At the very least. And so if we learn about the dynamics of domestic violence, then we can be careful of the assumptions that we make and be careful with the language in which we use, right? So we're just sharing of information, respectful of the material and of each other, that we be and we stay curious about the subject matter and be mindful of your feelings and know that there are people that you can talk to on campus and off campus for support if this becomes triggering in any way. And then I can also connect you to those people. And then we have a limited time together. This is not an exhaustive presentation. The reality is when I was trained and then when I actually facilitated a training, it was 72 hours of domestic violence. In my class, chisel it down to 3 hours. So speaking on an hour is a very difficult thing for me to do. Very difficult. So this is not exhaustive. There's so much more to cover. Are we all together? Yeah? Okay. You doing okay? Okay, all right. And you can ask questions along the way. You don't have to necessarily wait to the very end. If there's so many questions and I can't move forward, then at that time I'll ask you to hold on to your questions. But if there's questions here and there, that's no problem, okay? So in terms of defining domestic violence, we're talking about a specific type of relationship. A specific type of relationship. Domestic violence is not fundamentally an intimate partner issue, but a societal issue resulting from learned behavior which allow and affirm power and control through coercion and violence. This is a process that develops and advances over time with a cyclical pattern of behaviors that focus on bringing their partner under their control. These are not isolated one-time incidences. The violence is manifested in a range of coercion, abusive, and violent actions and behaviors. Now, to unpack that, one is it's a social issue. We're going to talk a little about the statistics. It is so common, it is a social issue. In the medical field, that domestic violence cases people are mandated reporters for adults. So it's not unusual, in particular if you're a woman and you go into your doctor's office and they ask you a series of questions about your safety because they are mandated reporters for adults. That is how frequent it is, right? So it is, and it's a social issue. It's a learned behavior. Now, learned behavior, it can be in terms of the agent of socialization that is home, but you can also grow up in a home that was not violent. Where else do we learn violence? You all know, where do we learn violence? Our peers? Where else? TV? Parents? Our government? Military? Law enforcement? I mean, we learn that violence gets the answer done. So it's not just in terms of home. You have layers and layers of that violence quote unquote solves things, right? And so that it's a learned behavior rooted in power and control and the imbalance of power and control. Healthy relationships fluctuate with decision and power making, right? Domestic violence relationships, these particular relationships, are very paternalistic. There's an imbalance of power and control where it's as if one is like a parent and the other one's like a child. There's not a fluctuation of power and control. It's very much, you better act right. And there's consequences if you don't act right, right? So it's very rigid, rooted in power and control, that it's a process, right? It's not one-time incident, but it's a process, and it's also cyclical. So we're going to get to that, what's called the cycle of violence. What is really taking place within a domestic violence home? And that it's rooted in power and control. And that it's using coercion, abuse, and violent actions. Well, so we're on the same page still? Yep. Okay. So since I entered into the field at the age of 21, and I'm no longer 21, aged a little bit, I've always asked the question, this question here: who knows of someone, knew of someone that was a victim of domestic violence? Every single presentation, every workshop, every training in the field, outside of the field, doctors' offices that I'm talking to doctors, that I'm talking to nurses, I'm talking to educators, I'm talking to the formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, college students always ask this question. So I'm going to ask you all. I'm not asking who. I'm just saying who here knows of someone, knew of someone that was in a domestic violence relationship? Raise your hand. Hi. Hi, hi. Look around the room. Oh, thank you. I've been asking this question over 20 years at every audience that I speak to. It's almost always around the 90th percentile of hands that go up. Once in a while, there'll be like 85% of the room. Once in a great while. Majority, it's about 90% of the room, right? And some folks don't raise their hand, but the answer is yes. Maybe not wanting to put attention on themselves, right? Knowing that there's much more. So yes, and we might even ask, why is this so common? If we want to know anything about today, we have to know its history. The reality is that women and why it disproportionately impacts women. It impacts men as well. We're going to see those statistics. But if we were like, wow, it disproportionately impacts women. Women were seen as property of our husbands, property of our fathers. We also might want to know why there's such high rates of child abuse, because children are seen as property as well. Our history is alive and well with us. It is very much alive and well with us. It is, get out of my business, that's my wife. I don't want to know your opinion, those are my kids. Right? So it shows up in everyday reality. And if we had more time, we would focus even more on the history of women and women as property. Some statistics: on an average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. 20 people per minute, right? During 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner violence, intimate partner contact, sexual violence, or intimate partner stalking, with impacts such as injury, fearlessness, fearfulness. Sorry, you know what I mean. Post-traumatic stress disorder, use of victim services, contraction of sexually transmitted diseases through the violence. The statistics continue to go. They're horrifying. Now, these statistics overwhelmingly are conservative numbers. We say that 1 in 4, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner that ranges from slapping, shoving, punching. In some cases may not be considered domestic violence. So 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men. If you look at feminist scholars overwhelmingly will say that 50% of all women will experience domestic violence in her lifetime. And the reason is the statistics they use are not just reported cases. Domestic violence and sexual assault are the most underreported crimes. Out of 10, 9 will go unreported. That's going to skew the data, right? So feminist scholars are saying, well, we can't just focus on reported. We also have to focus on like nonprofits and social services that they're seeking help, but they're not. They're seeking help, but they're not reporting it, right? Okay. So there's a lot more here. So types of abuse. Again, when we talked about the definition of domestic violence, it talked about coercion and abuse. These are some of the types of abuse. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to go over all of them. Physical, verbal, emotional, mental, psychological, spiritual, financial, sexual, and medical abuse. So physical is self-explanatory, right? Verbal. These are all ways in which one person is attempting to control another person. The imbalance of power and control, right? Mental abuse, psychological abuse, spiritual abuse, not allowing someone to practice their faith or their religion, right? Financial abuse, the notion that you can't work, or if you do work, you have to turn over the check. Or that you both work, but then when it comes to the mortgage or it comes to rent being due, the money's gone, right? Being given an allowance and trying to make magic out of that allowance, right? Making it stretch. Medical abuse. So trying to control another person through medical means, such as not allowing them to take their medication. Not allowing them to take their inhaler, their diabetes medication, giving them something they're allergic to, right? Not allowing them to see the doctor. Some of the survivors that I was blessed to work with oftentimes talked about how they were not allowed to seek medical attention, especially after a physical abuse altercation, and that they had to either not see the doctor at all or create some type of safety plan to see the doctor, like on lunch. And even then, that was oftentimes too dangerous to do. So yes. Now, if we look at each one of them, and again, if we had more time, I would go over each one of them. They're already horrible. They're horrifying. Now, in domestic violence, not one single one happens alone. They happen in relation to. So at any given moment, there's physical, verbal, emotional. There is verbal, emotional, mental. There's a combination of abuse going on at any particular time, and it can change over time. But there's never just one type of abuse. Now, someone may come up to me and say, okay, my partner is calling me names. As you talk to the person more, you realize there's other means in which they're being controlled. That there's financial abuse, that there's sexual abuse. Domestic violence is already taboo. Now you acknowledge sexual abuse within a domestic violence relationship, marital rape within domestic violence. I remember my thesis chair saying, Melanie, good luck if you think that you're going to be able to have survivors talk about that aspect. Domestic violence is already taboo. And now you're going to talk sexual assault and rape, right? So at any given moment, there's multiple times, and the lifespan of that relationship, it can change, but never one at any given time. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. All right. So dynamics, this is important. Well, all of it is important. So this is really important. This is what's called a cycle of violence. I didn't realize that I didn't put that up there. It's called the cycle of violence. Different sources call it different things, but the concepts stay the same. So if you want to know what is happening in that household, there are 3 distinct stages that are taking place, and I will walk you through them. So the first stage, I would start off with honeymoon stage. This is when let's say you first meet. Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, I like you, you like me. Gifts are being bought, attention is being given. There's the excitement. It's moving quickly, which is a characteristic of domestic violence. They move very quickly, the relationships. It goes from first date to I love you real quick to like, let's move in together. Real quick. So It's that honeymoon stage. It feels good. You want to see each other often. But then what happens is it goes into tension building stage. The I love yous, the wonderful feeling, the best foot forward, people sending their representative in the relationship can only last so long, right? And then all of a sudden, the facade starts cracking, the masks start cracking. And then you start seeing a different side of that person. And oftentimes you can feel that anxiety, you can feel the frustration of your partner, if that's your partner. They're getting angry, they might become verbally abusive, they might get upset, hit a wall, hit a table, break items. Oftentimes they break your items, not theirs. And if you're married or living together, they break mutual items, and if law enforcement's called, they can't do anything because it's mutual property. And so that might be taking place, but then it escalates. So that tension increases and it starts cutting like a knife, right? You can feel it, kind of like a pulse beating. And then there's the abusive incident, also known as explosion stage. The climax of the abuse, whatever type of abuse that's taking place, punching, kicking, hitting, raping, name-calling, financial abuse, spiritual abuse, medical abuse, whatever the types are happening at the climax of the abuse. Most survivors leave during that stage. The most dangerous time to leave is during that stage. I can't tell you how many survivors, when I was working at a nonprofit, it was an explosion stage, were called to pick up the survivor and their children with the clothes on their back. Hungry, with the clothes on the back. If they're lucky, they have a garbage bag of items, and we would take them to the shelter. We knew that was the most dangerous stage for them and for us as advocates, because we were facilitating their liberation of that relationship, right? So it was very risky. Anyone that works with survivors, you have to have thick skin, and you have to be brave. Because it's also correlated with stalking. Domestic violence is correlated with stalking. So the abuser will follow electronically, physically, you name it. So the abusive incident is happening, and then we go to the honeymoon. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. It'll never happen again. I promise I'll change. Here's some flowers. I'm so sorry. Tears rolling down. I don't know what came over me. Please, I can't live without you. I don't know what I would do if you don't ever take me back. I promise I'll change. I'll go to church. Let's go to church, right? It's never, I'll go to counseling. Let's go to counseling, right? And so then it's like, the honeymoon stage is like, okay, well, this is the first version, this is the first aspect I saw of you that was different, and I love you, and so maybe it was just a bad day, a bad situation, a bad incident. Okay, there's hope for change. It was just a bad season, right? All right, honeymoon stage. Honeymoon stage lasts for so long, then you go back to tension building, back to abusive explosion stage, and then honeymoon. So it goes in a circle. And as the relationship increases in length, it becomes more frequent and it becomes more violent. At some point, when it's a long-term relationship, you can actually omit the honeymoon, and it goes tension building explosion, tension building explosion. They don't have to sing the shoulda, woulda, couldas. I got you. Controlled physically, emotionally, financially. No shoulda, woulda, couldas needed. Completely controlled, right? And so we see this happening, again, it becomes more violent. Some survivors will attempt to escape and then realize, well, we share a lease. We gotta reunite in some way, we have children. And then sometimes they know, well, when we do reunite, it's not gonna be good. It may be even worse. Some will say, well, I fight back. They may catch a case, right? They might get arrested for domestic violence. They might say, well, I'm not gonna, I'll fight back, and then I get it physically worse. And then some will, what we call, endure the abuse, and I put a lot of asterisk on there to make sure that it's not victim blaming. That this is survival. This is fight or flight. This is what do I need to do to survive? How do I keep myself safe, alive for myself and for my babies? Right? This is not in sociology class, history class, anthropology class to say, if I were in that situation, this is what I would do. No, it's in the moment of survival. And many times survivors will cover important parts of their body, go in fetal position, and have this out-of-body experience as if they're watching themselves on TV, it taking place. Survivors would tell me that that was also a form, while it was survival, it was also a form of resistance. I had one survivor who say that she was like, you know what, that fool didn't even know that I wasn't even there. He's beating me, he's beating the shit out of me, I'm not even there. How about that? Using it, taking significant meaning of that situation as a form of resistance, right? The empowerment in those minute situations. So it was, again, how do you survive? And then the cycle, again, continues. Does that make sense? Yes? You with me? Yes. Okay, it's already 1:30. Yeah. So keep in mind that's characteristics, or that's the cycle of violence of what's particular happening in that home. There is a hope for change. Sometimes, especially if you have children, they might say, well, you know, that person is a bad partner, but they're a good father, or they're a good mother, in hopes that they will change and that not wanting to necessarily raise children alone. And I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit later, hopefully. But some characteristics to domestic violence relationship. There's a use of intimidation. There's true fear that's taking place. Making the person afraid, using looks, actions, and gestures, smashing things, using emotional abuse, putting that person down, making them feel bad about themselves, calling them names, using isolation. So many folks will say, well, why do you stay? Why do you, quote unquote, put up with it? We're going to get to that. And the reality is they're being stalked. They're being isolated, and that's a process. In the beginning, oh, everything's fine, but then as the relationship increases in time, it is more like, well, why do you want to go over your mom's house? You know how your mom is with me. And starts causing issues with you and your family. Oh, well, you know, it's that I trust you, but I just don't trust your friends. You know how your friend is. You know, like seeds are being planted negatively. Okay, so now it's distance from mom. Now it's distance from certain friends. And it becomes an island of two. So when in fact that survivor is ready to leave, oftentimes they have no bridge. And so many friends and family will say, oh, I'm so sick and tired of hearing it. I said, man, I wonder how difficult it is to live it if you're tired of just hearing it. Wow, that must be hard, no? Right? The lifeline. Friends, relationships are the lifelines of survivors. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. So what we see is the person that's causing the abuse is minimizing the situation. It's not that big of a deal. I just slapped you. I didn't punch you. Why are you making a big deal about it? Right? The minimization. The denying. I didn't do that. Your mind must have made that up. And when you know that something's true and then someone is in your face saying, no, that's not true. That's not true. You start questioning your own reality. You're like, wait a minute. Did I dream it? Was that you? That's just a normal process, right? And then blaming. Well, if you just knew when to shut up, I wouldn't have had to do that. Well, you know how I get when I drink. Well, you know how I am when I'm on meth. Right? So blaming, external factors, never taking accountability for oneself. Using children. Oh, you want to leave me? Well, okay, well, if there's financial abuse, housing insecurity, where are they going to go? Most of us have a difficult time paying our mortgage and rent without financial abuse. Most of us are not being paid a living wage. Now you add financial abuse in a domestic violence relationship, and you have children, right? Where do they go, and how do they stay gone, right? So using children, and then we've also had situations where I remember a survivor that I worked with. She said, well, you know, she could barely afford basic necessities, and he threatened to take full custody. And she was just saying, well, you know, I don't want him to have full custody. I wanted to have shared custody, but it was a way to discipline her. Right? It was a way to punish her. And she said, she said that he threatened that, well, you can't afford the children. You can't afford the children. What, you gonna go homeless? You gonna be an unfit mother? I'll just have to call CPS on you. Child Protective Services. You oftentimes see when there's a divorce that the court system is used to weaponize the adult victim. It can be years. It can be years of weaponizing the criminal justice system against survivors. Using male privilege, when we look at it historically, you see that there is a patriarchal household in a patriarchal society. And we can see it play out, in particular, in a heterosexual relationship, in particular. And it's my house, my rules. You're lucky I'm allowing you to be in it. Type of notion. Exerting that privilege, using economic abuse, using coercion and threats, and then on the outside you have physical violence, sexual violence, emotional violence. So it's a wheel with power and control at the center. All of this is happening simultaneously. This and the cycle of violence. So before we ask, well, why do you stay? Why do you put up with it? Understand the dynamics of what they're navigating and trying to survive. That's not even talking about going to school. That's not even talking about working. That's not even talking about raising children. That's not talking about maybe medical concerns. That's not even counting all that, right? So yes, so cycle of violence. Any questions so far? Yes.
Is there a way we can get this website?
Yes, I can send it to someone. You want me to send it? I'll send it. Is there an email? I'll send it. Okay, I'll send it.
Make sure it's on our site.
Okay. So, so the most common, thank you for asking. I bet other people were thinking it, no? Yeah, you see. Yes. So the most common question asked to survivors are, why do you stay? This is full of oftentimes victim blaming and assumptions. One is, we assume that they haven't attempted to leave. It's an average of 7 times before someone can successfully leave a domestic violence relationship. It's also correlated with stalking. And also a bigger issue is, we don't ask, why does your partner batter? Why does your partner abuse? We say, why do you stay? Ooh. We're looking at subordination, the group that lacks power. And we say, why are you down there? And our back is domination. That has the means, the finances, that is in control. But we're asking subordinate groups, why do you stay and why do you put up with it? We don't say, why do you batter, why do you abuse? If your partner is so dumb and so ugly and no one's gonna want your partner, then why are you still there? Why didn't you leave? We don't ask that. Oftentimes we're full of victim blaming and not even acknowledging what we're doing. And we could have good intentions. We could be allies and love the people in our life, and we want to be supportive, but we're asking all the wrong questions. Or our language is reflective of our own victim blaming. We have to check ourselves. Survivors know if you're friend or foe. You don't have to say, I'm an advocate, I'm an ally. They'll tell you. They'll tell you if you are or not. Because our language is reflective of it, right? So yes, so it's an average of 7 times before someone successfully leaves a domestic violence relationship. There's a whole process of leaving that we just don't have time to talk about. But usually it begins with temporary leaving. It's like this person really hurt me this time. You know what, I'm gonna be gone for a few hours. Then it's like, I'm gonna be gone for the day. Then it's gonna be, I'm gonna be gone for the night. Then I'm gonna be gone for the weekend. I'm gonna be gone for a week. I'm gonna be gone for 2 weeks. And it starts stretching. And then it's like, at one point it's like, I may die. The number one threat in domestic violence is, I'm gonna kill you. It's known as terrorist threats. Common. Domestic Violence 101, page 1. I'm going to kill you. And realizing, you know what? This person may in fact kill me. And what am I going to do? And how do I exit? Do I have anything available to me? You know, I was having a great conversation with a student before this class, and the student was saying, we don't know anything about this. We don't know the resources out there. Like, I wish we knew about the resources. I wish I knew what was going on in domestic violence, the background of it. It was like, if so, then we'd be able to connect people to resources, right? We can refer them accordingly. And so, yes. And to answer that question, so eventually it becomes, oh, I need to leave, and I really need to leave for the safety of myself and my children. We oftentimes see that the pivotal point to leaving is where the violence is increasing toward the children. So domestic violence and child abuse are married. Very close together. And typically when the adult victim is like, this is getting really bad, like really, really bad, is when the violence toward the children increase. And oftentimes, statistically, it's mom that's like, I need to make a move. I don't know if I could live with myself if something happens to the children, right? But to answer that question, because people definitely have that question, is the fear of more violence, the fear of being killed, afraid that children are going to be used against them, being isolated, the economic insecurity, housing insecurity. We have one domestic violence shelter in Stanislaus County. Stanislaus County is about 500,000 people. Let me give you context. Last time I checked, maybe it changed, there was 22 spots for survivors. Why do you stay? Why do you put up with it? Why don't you just go to a shelter? 22 spots for 500,000 people. We're ill-equipped. We're very much ill-equipped, right? So housing insecurity, lack of resources or information, immigration status. If there's domestic violence and one person or both people are undocumented, that's another way that's being leveraged against the victim that is undocumented. Well, you want to leave? Okay. I'm just going to call ICE on you. The threat of immigration. And if the children are born in the United States, the true threat, if you're a parent, the true threat that for your own liberation, you may be deported and your children have every right to be here. And you're the victim. That's heavy. Heavy things to consider, right? So many survivors will say, I have to choose between violence and homelessness, right? To me, I don't even call that a choice. Is that a choice? I mean, you know? In terms of barriers to leaving, issues of racism, transphobia, discrimination. Now we're talking about marginalized populations that where there's a history of law enforcement not being friendly to specific groups of people. Black and brown folks, especially in poor neighborhoods, we typically don't run to call the police. And that's because of experience. And now you have domestic violence in those neighborhoods? Or you're like, okay, this is not okay, but I'm also in a relationship with a black man or a brown man, and I don't want to put him in the system. I want this to stop, but if I call law enforcement, now what does that mean in terms of mass incarceration? Right? Things to consider. Transphobia, law enforcement not being friendly to the LGBTQ plus communities and saying, oh, I have to navigate this. I want this to stop, but at the same time, the experience hasn't been healthy with the system. Having to navigate that and make decisions. So failure of the criminal justice system, our culture. Different cultures say if you seek out help, you're bringing shame to our culture, shame to our family. In particular, collectivist groups. It's like, no, the we comes before the I. You also have religion. Well, you got married under the eyes of God. Right? And religion being used to weaponize victims, very common. Family pressures of, taboo of divorce and separation, their hope for it to change, and the shame. Shame is so incredible. Domestic violence survivors are some of the strongest people I've ever met. Just blow me away. Just blow me away. I'm just like, wow. I can't judge you because I'm too much in awe of you. Wow. And that includes the children of violent homes. It's a lot to navigate. And there's a lot of shame there on all parties to be able to say, like, and you can't heal if you don't identify the shame. I also had this one young man that I was mentoring this family, young married couple, heterosexual couple, and we developed a really good relationship. And they both came up to me and was like, you know, Melanie, can we talk to you? And I was like, sure. And then they informed me that they had a domestic violence relationship, and I was working with them for years in the community. And she was just like, you know, this is what's happening behind the scenes. This is like unheard of, like for them to like both tell me. And he said, I love her. I love her. She's my best friend, and I keep hurting her. And I want to stop, and I don't know how. I'm so ashamed of myself. We have to have space for those conversations, not just in terms of victimhood, but perpetration. We can't just shame and go off to a corner. We have to be able to say, like, we're walking around with trauma and have to deal with that trauma. The criminal justice system, women's jails, men's jails and prisons, they're trauma centers. About 90% of them grew up in violent homes. That's not a coincidence. They're trauma centers. And so those are many barriers to leaving, and most folks have multiple barriers, not one barrier, right? Food insecurity, housing insecurity, I mean, you name it. So assisting with survivors, the ways in which those of you that are professionals, or all of you that are going to become professionals, again, I'm not teaching you to be experts. This is typically a really long series, but ways to assist survivors when you become a professional, being able to assist them with basic needs, housing, food, employment. For Pete's sakes, if we were paid a living wage, what a concept. What a concept, right? Advocacy, to be able to be helpful, validating, challenge dominant narratives of socialization. What we see in particular with men and male victims, the stigma of being a man and being a victim, and the unfriendliness with law enforcement and men victims. One, not believing men. Number two, making fun of men. And men feeling shame about it and embarrassment. You also have shame with women, right? And so to be able to challenge those dominant narratives, say this is not okay, that this is truly a public health issue that we need to address. It is not the battle of the sexes. It's trauma. And if students that have had me, you know, I always say, if you don't deal with your issues are going to deal with you. Right? In our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with each other. And so having folks to be able to say, you matter. This isn't your fault. You're worthy of help. You're worthy to feel safe and whole. That there are resources out there. I can connect you with some resources. Because what happens is in domestic violence, there's a battering of the self. So what happens is it's a slow process, but it's the lovey-dovey, but then it's eventually causing doubt to your partner. And your partner starts feeling less than and ugly and invalidated. Right? And then feels crappy about themselves. That's a process. When I used to work at a shelter, when I was gaining access in terms of my research at Humboldt, hey, I worked at their local shelter, I was volunteering at their local shelter, and it was the first time that I was doing a group there, and I would ask a question, which I thought was like a simple question. And we always did what's called check-in. Feminist-based organizations oftentimes do like check-ins. And so, we started off with a check-in, your name, how you're feeling, and then a question. And the reality is majority of people don't know how they're feeling. Okay is not a feeling, fine is not a feeling, all right's not a feeling, right? Like, how are you feeling at any given moment? So people can get grounded and feel in touch with what they're feeling at the moment. And then on top of that, to be able to say, the question was, so what do you like to do for fun? I'm 22 years old. And I'm asking you something, that was the question, what do you like to do for fun? They were so removed from who they are and were. They were like, I don't know what I like to do for fun. I don't even remember what I like to do for fun. Some would say, well, I like when I'm not beat up. I like when I'm not called names. And then I would say, what did you used to like to do? I used to like to dance. I used to like to dress up. I used to like to go to brunch. And my responsibility was to connect them to their self because there was a disconnection from their self. They became something other than themselves through their socialization. Does that make sense? And the power was for them to see power within themselves. That they were their own liberator, not social services. It was just connecting them with resources. Like, no, you're your own liberator. I might just be like facilitating the door a little bit, but you're walking through and doing the work and being reconnected to the self. Who are you now? Who do you want to be? And we need people to be able to help facilitate that. And professional safety planning. The reality is leaving is a process. And when I was working at an organization, well, 2 organizations, much of the safety planning was happening with people still in the relationship, and they were preparing to leave. And so it was like, how do you increase how do we help them increase their safety level at work, at school, and at home? And if that's what you wanted to do, what is the leaving plan, right? That's where we need to direct them to professional safety planning. Let's see. Healthy and helping relationships are at the center of liberation. Talking to survivors, all of them said what facilitated the end of the violence were people, relationships, and resources. Someone believing in them, someone sticking through with them, a friend sticking through with them, talking life into them, planting seeds, connecting them to resources, and knowing as an advocate, that was my position, one of my positions, as an advocate, I knew that it took an average of 7 times before someone successfully fled a relationship. So as a professional, I knew that I had to be patient. Young Melanie wanted to come in, swoop in there, and take everyone with me. And it was like, well, I'm rescuing, not empowering. I had to inform them about their resources. We have to explore the consequences of each option, because there's consequences to all options, and then support them on their decision, because they are the expert in their relationship, right? So I'm going to end with some of the survivors that, one of the questions that I asked in my thesis research was, what do you want to say to people that have no idea about domestic violence? What's the message that you have for the larger community? And some folks spoke out and said, I think that if people had an out, they could see that that was feasible and doable. And they could count on it. More people would actually go through with getting out. I felt like, gosh, if employer, could just pay me a living wage, then I could. But I was making $10 an hour supporting 2 children. It's not as cut and dry as they seem to think it is. Some people think, well, what is wrong with you? Duh. But it's not that simple. There's a lot more factors involved than people realize, and there's a lot more levels of abuse than people realize that there are. There's just a lot more factors of how you get trapped, and there is a trap. You need to plan for it, leaving, and you need to do it quietly. You need to make the arrangements before you actually make the break. You need to go quickly, quietly, and have a good distance there. There are people out there that can help before you leave the house. There are people who can help after. You are not alone, and it's not your fault. Get help, get out, get help. Thank you all. That's all that I have. So I know that there's, thank you. So I know there's like maybe 6 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions for me? It's a quiet group. No questions? Oh, yes.
You said there's only one domestic abuse shelter in San Francisco.
Yes.
And my question is what domestic abuse, what's the waiting list to get into a shelter where your identity is protected,
Yep.
anonymous, needs are met, whatever, to move to another place? What's the waiting list for that? Somebody wants
Sure. Sure, I think that's a great question. It varies because, so working at an agency, it would change depending on when you called. At some point, someone would call and there'd be a 2-week wait. Other times it was a 3-week wait. Sometimes there was no wait. So it literally is like live time on like what is the wait right now at this moment, someone would need to call. It continuously fluctuated. Now keep in mind 22 spots, but all cultures and languages are not represented. So what we ran into was cultural illiteracy from professionals, right? So it was the notion of like, we weren't hiring people from different cultures and backgrounds and languages. So what does that mean for communities of color? What does that mean for monolingual Spanish speakers or other speakers that speak another language that's not English? And so we would see inequality after inequality, and then it would be like, oh, you speak Spanish good enough. I'm like, no, I do not. Like, they're like, you are bilingual. I'm like, bilingual-ish, but my Spanish is hood Spanish. It is not Castilian Spanish. Like, no. And so, but what happened is, because there was a need, it was like, well, you're good enough, you translate. Sometimes they got every third word. The inequality on top of inequality, and then the isolation of cultural differences within the shelter. So there was just so much oppression on all levels. And so to answer your question, it varied. It still varies. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So are these shelters funded through the public, or are they funded through the government? And either way, how do you go about advocating for more funding for this?
Yes, well, it depends on the agency. So overwhelmingly, it's government funded. But I know when I left, the ED, the executive director at that time, was being picky on not applying for government funds, because the reality is whoever funds you has control over you, right? That's a lifelong lesson, folks. Watch whose money you take. So that was the beginning of the shift. And so there would be some streams of revenue that there was freedom to be able to spend as it was. Overwhelmingly, it was government funding. Also depending politically, who is in the House, who's in the Senate, who's president. I remember, I forgot what year it was. It was a conservative year. I forgot what year it was, and the whole case management department was annihilated. The funding was just ripped because, again, when we're looking at social services and different political parties that vote for providing funds in specific areas, it was wiped out. An entire department was wiped out. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yes. So is that in my shoes? Yes. So if you're curious, the local domestic violence agency is called Haven. And they're having a special event April 1st. Do you have the specifics? April 1st. You know what? I'll send it also. So there's a flyer, and they're doing their annual event that brings awareness. So if you want to be able to help on that. But also, I would always tell my students, if you're in a club and you can connect resources to be able to provide diapers, clothing, boys and teenagers are overwhelmingly forgotten. Boys of all ages are completely forgotten. And so I remember I used to be part of a Christmas program where we would, people would adopt a family for Christmas, and they would adopt, our clients. And overwhelmingly, I had to go out and buy for boys and teens because people want to donate to girls. Right? So that's a way that you could reach, especially clubs, where you can say, clubs have come in and been like, can we paint for you? Can we cut your lawn? We had folks that are great at makeup. Can we come in and do makeovers for the shelter? Like, whatever your gift is, to be able to say, hey, I can share it. Right? You can help in very meaningful levels. You can, a lot of times helping in macro levels feels really frustrating and almost like hopeless at times, but you can help on a micro level. You can affect your world, your immediate world. Did you have your hand up? Yes.
Is the local shelter, is that just a women and children's shelter?
No, it used to be. It used to be, so now it helps everyone. So it's, what is the title now? So here, I almost forgot. Here. So right here, you go on resources. There's the national hotline, phone number. You can also text it. Now, if someone speaks another language and you don't have interpreters, you can contact the national hotline and they will connect you with an interpreter. There's also state level, so the partnership also that's in Sacramento. You have the local. Healthy Alternatives to Violent Environments is the local one that used to be for women and children. Now it's for everyone. This is the business line, the emergency crisis line. So if you're fine now, or maybe you're not fine now, and you walk out and you're like, I'm a little triggered, or I'm a lot triggered, you can call the crisis line. 24 hours, 7 days a week, right here. Right? You can call that at any given moment, and someone will pick up the line and to be able to be there for you to hear you out. And then also, since domestic survivors oftentimes lack basic necessities, I also included like a resource guide, right? Like the resource guide that has housing available and food and emergency childcare, all of those things. So that's also attached to the website that I created. Anything else? I know our time's. Yes.
I've heard that since COVID, domestic abuse has been on the rise, and yet there's very little statistical information, meaning people aren't actually recording what's happening. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that situation.
Thank you. I think that's very insightful. Yes, that's what we hear, but there's a research lag. There's a research lag. We're always behind, right? So I don't know, but I would imagine that given a few years, that we're going to be able to have that data. But at this moment, I'm not familiar. But we have definitely, not only in terms of domestic violence, but child abuse and neglect. And so many young folks had to stay home, and home was not a safe place for many, many people. And now you're shelter in place and you're stuck at home. I remember, I just knowing that at that time, I remember crying. They weren't my babies, but they were my babies. And I'm just like, man, home is not safe for so many folks. And now they're at home with their abuser 24/7. And that's heartbreaking. So, well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.